Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Kirby, and of course, we talk with people who are going to help our small and medium-sized nonprofits do good better. My hypothesis today for all of you nonprofits listening out there is that your donors want to know what's going on with your donations and what your impact is. My guess is it's not a lot of transparency that goes by. Not that you don't want to, but just you don't think about it in the forefront of your brain. Today, we change that perspective because we're going to bring in an organization that's actually starting with that idea and working its way outwards. Sound cool? Yes, it does. I would like to welcome my guest today, Scott and Madison. Scott, the president, Madison, the ED of eMite.org. Welcome to the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much. Appreciate you having us.
I'm very excited to have you both on today because the concept of what eMite.org does and kind of how you facilitated this and the dashboards that you get from as a donor or a supporter of the organizations that you kind of match, and it sounds and looks amazing. And that's my teaser before we get into this stuff, because before we get into that, I think a lot of people are kind of like the idea of transparency. They love this, but maybe might not know what eMite.org is. So could we start with a 5,000-foot view on who you are, what you do, and why we're talking today?
Absolutely. So eMite.org is we've been called a matchmaker between donors and impactful projects, humanitarian projects around the world. And so essentially what we do is we facilitate that relationship. We go out, we vet organizations and projects, and then we bring those projects that we approve back to our donor base, and the donors have an opportunity to engage in those projects. We handle everything from the beginning to the end, and at the end, we produce one of our favorite things, which is a celebration video showing the completion of the project. And we deliver all of that to the donor. That's a 5,000-foot view of what we do.
It's a super 5,000-foot view, and I think that
okay, it's a 30,000.
It might be 30,000, and because the idea of this, where in the nonprofit world, right, we always think that there's never an end to a project, right? There's always another donor, there's always another event to do or something else. What I love about this is that here's the completion. This is what your impact has done. Madison, how did you come up with this, or how does the idea go from your being a facilitator of good to matchmaking? And where does the leap go from, like, not only are we going to matchmake, but we're going to show you directly what happens at the end of wherever your generosity is led?
Oh, well, I mean, that's kind of how eMite was inspired. So I think I might let my dad take that. This is my dad, by the way.
This is my daughter.
Because he had the inspiration to create eMite. And so I think that would kind of answer that question a bit more.
Yeah, well, absolutely. From an inspirational standpoint, Patrick, I had the opportunity when I was about my daughter's age to be a director of a private foundation. And I had the opportunity to work with organizations, building orphanages and helping out in hospitals and things like that. And it was through that experience that I understood, having going in field and seeing the completion of these projects, I understood the blessing that it was to be able to experience that. And I realized I was getting that special treatment because I worked for a large donor organization. And so we were doing large capital campaign projects. And I was getting insight, and I was getting that experience that I call the joy of giving. It's that experience at the end of a completion of a project where you get to see smiling faces, and you get to see the lives that are impacted. And it was out of that experience that the idea of eMite came, because in the middle of one of these experiences, which we call the watermelon story, at an orphanage in Telmachu, Romania, that the inspiration for eMite came, I understood. I got the inspiration of, hey, what about everybody else? What about those that are faithfully giving on a monthly basis, but they may be only giving $5, $10, $15, even $100 a month? What about that type of exposure? What type, how do they get that experience? And so, and by the way, Patrick, this is back in the 90s. So a lot of things had to develop out before we could do eMite, but thankfully guys like Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg, these guys had a plan for implementing the technology, and middle of 2015 is when eMite actually launched. And the concept behind it is, though, no matter the size of your donation, no matter how much you give, if you give $5, if you give $50,000, you get what we call the white glove or the first class donor experience. You get to experience the updates. You get to see throughout the full process of a project. You get to see you get to see everything. You get that transparency. So that's why it was developed. That's kind of the inspiration behind it, and it has, over the past 5 years that we've been operating, has kind of developed into its own has its own aspects that it's developed out of that.
Well, I love this because, Madison, maybe you can talk about this, because the dashboard itself, right? So if you're a donor, you've got a project, you get updates, and it's live, it's real time. You know, as a donor, you sort of give to a project, and then you kind of hear anything for a while, you know, here in the States, and you're building a project, and then when the building's done, you get to come for the ribbon cutting, and then that's it. Mm-hmm. Where you have kind of upended this game, in which I give $25 or I give $50, and I'm sort of interested in where the project is. Well, you've got an entire front page or entire interaction piece where you as the donor get to go in and can see in real time where things are in the process. How has that been for the interaction? How has that been for donor, as you said, the donor joy? How has that been received by those who are participating in some of these projects?
Yeah, I think you touched on something really interesting. I think in the very beginning, we knew that it was going to be extremely important to update donors consistently while the project was happening. We had the idea of going in field, sending a videographer in field and collecting this incredible celebration video. And that really shows the ending of the project. And like my dad was saying, all the smiling faces. Mm-hmm. But there's always that time in between when you start the project and when you actually finish it, that can, for eMite, range anywhere from 3 to 6 months. And we knew that we didn't want to leave our donors hanging. We didn't want people giving and not hearing anything for 3 to 6 months. Mm. And so the idea of spreading the joy of giving, which we constantly say here at eMite, and people really experiencing what giving is meant to be, is it's not possible without letting them know what is happening, as you said, in real time with live updates. And so we send out, here at eMite, we send out monthly reports. So if a project starts, we send out monthly reports till the celebration video is complete. And I think that's just where that's our idea of people experiencing the joy of giving.
Yeah. Right.
How's the donor reaction been? Have you received a good sort of feedback on this? Because, and it's a method to my questioning here, because I think this explains to a lot of other organizations that should pay attention to what you're doing. Yeah. Listen up to the answer to this, because there's a conclusion piece I want to get to too. So how has the reaction been?
Yeah. So Patrick, our donor base, we're relatively new. We're only 5 years old, right? So as far as knowledge of eMite and just the donor base in general, we have a relatively small donor base, but I will say this: our donor retention rate right now doubles what the average is within the nonprofit world. So we are retaining donors over a time frame at twice the rate of what the median or average is for the industry. We have awesome testimonials. We just got done sending out an impact report to all of our donors. And so what an impact report is essentially it's a digital report that we send out personally to everybody via email. And that impact report gives them kind of it's a little more in depth than you would have in an end of year report. So it's a personal impact report. This is what you accomplished with your donations. And we got about 20% of the people that we sent that out to actually replied back to us, to this email, and we're saying how wonderful it was to hear that things were growing, the impact that was being made, and you get that type of engagement. And then we have these awesome testimonials. I think you have some.
Yeah.
Madison, if you won't mind, she's going to read a couple of the testimonials that we got from the donors.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we have one testimonial, which I think this may be my favorite. This is from a young giver. And she said, I have always been aware of those not as fortunate, but I have not taken the time to learn more and do something about it. Since finding might in my faith, I have learned my purpose, and giving this gift is just the beginning.
So yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. I get excited about this, Patrick. I'll talk right over the top of Madison.
I love it. I love it.
And I did just want to say that, like, coming from like me being, I'm young, I'm 24, and being able to engage, because we have a very large younger donor base, being able to receive feedback from younger individuals who really feel like they're making an impact because they're visually able to see it is so huge, and just brings so much encouragement that this is really working. So I just wanted to
Madison is hitting on a really important point, because there's a demographic in our society, Patrick, that I think is overlooked by nonprofits. We don't expect those individuals who are just getting into the professional life, or those who have young families, they don't have disposable income. And so we don't reach out to them. And we certainly don't give them the idea that they have an opportunity to impact. But we at eMite, we understand what you can do with $5, $10, if you'll just make that commitment. And so we're the ability to bring back that information and engage these young donors on a continual basis helps them understand that, yes, in fact, even a small donation has an impact, a continual impact. And that's resonating with people who I think, and this is just my opinion, that are generally overlooked. Mm-hmm. We go after the big donors, we go after the older generations that have the disposable income, but in a lot of instances we overlook a huge resource, which is all of those young people who want to get engaged. And so eMite's doing a good job of that. I'm excited about that, by the way, if you can't tell.
There is, yes, I can, and I love it, because anyone who's as enthusiastic about this kind of stuff, it's just a great topic to chat about. So there's a lot to unpack there, because I want everybody who's listening to this and they're looking at their own organization and saying, okay, what are they doing different than everybody else? And the minute you said we send out monthly reports as the build goes on, I didn't hear anything about we're asking for more money during those reports. This is a touch point. This is an update. This is something to relate to that has nothing to do with soliciting, and that's relationship building. And my question, and you answered it earlier, is what's the retention rate? Because it's got to be insane. And you imagine you're doubling whatever the national average is. This is the epidemic in the nonprofit world on how do you solve this? The answer is right in front of your face. And the answer is what eMite.org is doing is constant communication that doesn't involve constant badgering for dollars, and you figured it out.
Absolutely.
If you're listening, you better pay attention to what eMite.org is doing and what Scott and Madison are talking about, which is you are telling stories, you are giving updates, you're not badgering people for donations all the time, and you're showing what the impact of their gifts going forward. I love it. Hands down, one of my favorite things in the entire world. But what you really latched onto is this idea that younger donors don't have the want or desire to give. Not true. But what they do have is, and I will admit this too, and I'm still old, but a lack of patience when it comes to communicating, right? So if you just ignore, hey, here's my $10 and you don't hear from them again, they're moving on to something else, right? Because their attention span has moved on to something else because you haven't kept in front of them to give them updates and scale it forward one step at a time. That you've solved that particular issue. So no wonder younger individuals are donating, because they can see in real time. You're talking in 144 characters, for God's sakes, for the rest of eternity. And you're looking at updates and you're refreshing your social media pages every 4 seconds. Of course, you're going to want an organization that is as reactive as you
Right.
have been going forward. Brilliant.
Exactly. That's
That's
exactly
true.
right. I mean, you hit on so many good points, Patrick,
Summary.
that just resonate with us. And so, Patrick, my ideal, I would love to get to the point where we never, ever had to ask.
Yeah.
That it was engagement, it was a joy, you enjoy it, and so you get involved. And so, frankly, we probably from a charitable organization standpoint, some would say we don't do enough asking. But we do a tremendous amount of communicating, a tremendous amount of communication. And our objective in the future is to actually allow the donor to select how they want to be communicated with and the frequency with which. Right now, we have to use a general platform in order to do that. But in the future, we'll actually allow the donor to select how they're going to be communicated with and how often they will be. But I would love it so that we send out a report on it. We send you the celebration video and the donor's like, dude, that was fantastic. I want to do this again.
Right.
That's how I would love to drive donor revenue. Not from the standpoint of, hey, we really need your help, but from the standpoint of, look what happened, get engaged again.
Right.
And I think donors are willing to do it. Charity and charitable organizations are missing an element called giving inspiration. And we don't inspire the donors to get engaged with the activities and the mission that we're involved in. We love the mission, but we don't present it in a manner to the donors where they can grasp a hold of it and say, yeah, I want to be involved in that mission. And that's, that's what we work at here at eMite. For us, we consider ourselves a ministry to donors that gets the opportunity as a byproduct to do fantastic projects with awesome partners around the world. And so our focus is on encouraging people to be generous, but from a standpoint of inspiring them to engage rather
Right.
than asking them to engage.
Right.
Sorry, I talked a lot.
No.
You've stumbled across the white whale of fundraising. And that is, you're telling enough stories and aligning people's values perfectly enough so that they ask you how they can help you, rather than you having to be the catalyst for asking for a specific project.
Yeah.
Right.
That's where I think you're headed to, where again, Scott, kind of where you're talking about with this, you never want to ask again. Well, you might not have to, if people are seeing in real time what all the impact is, and they're going to latch on like, whoa, why not me? Why can't I be involved? And they're like, oh, I can by clicking here. And that the frequency becomes what they want, and it's putting it back into their hand. And I think that's really one of the more unique concepts of this. What I'd love to know though, Madison, is how do you vet and how do you source the type of impacts or the type of programs that you offer to sort of facilitate for completion? How does that work, and how did that begin as a concept? Because again, you could go and put up 1.5 million different things. That's not going to help, right? So this is what I love, is that there is a niche version of like this. I mean, there's a whole lot of like about this, but like, how do you source those, and then how do you facilitate those conversations with your potential donors?
So how we source them just kind of varies. One of our favorite ways is getting recommendations of partners to work with. So I love it when givers reach out and say, I know of this local organization, or I personally give to this other organization that I would love you guys to research and vet and potentially partner with. So that's one of our favorite ways. It could also be that there may be a humanitarian crisis in a certain country, and we research some of the best organizations to partner with in that particular country. So there are a variety of ways. It's a lot of Googling. And then obviously once we find one, if we kind of bring them through this initial process where we say, okay, are they active on social media? Do they have an up-to-date website? What does their board and team leadership look like? Those things, if they pass that, then we go into their finances. We see if there really is any project that we could potentially partner with them on. A lot of our projects are short term. And so we aren't, eMite to this date hasn't built a massive school that takes, 2 years to build. Generally, they're shorter term. And then we will reach out to them and establish a relationship. And by the time our team goes in field, so by the time an eMite representative and a videographer go in field, we have been in communication with the partner organization for around, I'd say 3 to 6 months. So by the time the project is finished, we've really built a strong relationship with these organizations. So yeah, that's a little bit about the research and vetting.
Yeah. So, and just to tack on just a second, a little bit more. So a 3 to 6 month vetting process to commence a project. Patrick, last year we vetted 80 organizations, and we did projects with 8. So that gives you an idea about the scope. We have a team of coordinators, project coordinators that work through that process with them. And so our vetting process is significant. And I'm going to tell you why. We guarantee our projects. And what that means, Patrick, is this. If you were a donor and you gave to a particular project, if eMite cannot deliver the experience that we understand is that ideal donor experience, if we can't get the celebration video, if for whatever reason the result of the project isn't what we expected it to be when we were vetting it, we take operational funds and we pay for that project. And we take your donation and we ask you, can we move this, or would you like, what other project would you like to move this to? So we have we put the onus on us as an organization to accomplish that. And we tack on a guarantee, which makes sure that we're going to vet that organization and the project properly.
Yeah.
So it's a real deal for us.
It's very extensive vetting.
Yeah, I was just going to say that sounds like a lot of work. But here's what I love most about this too, and stop me if I'm wrong on this. The vetting process and what you work with the organizations who are looking for funding, the benefit of just vetting and getting the information together and garnered and budgeting and scoping. Not only does that help you figure out if there's a donor match, but it also helps I imagine, helps the organization ready themselves for grants or other donors or et cetera. I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit in this whole thing on the trickle down, seriously, on the trickle down effect of what you're providing the organizations from organizing their own thoughts onto an actual business plan and a model and a funding budget, et cetera, that they might not get a sort of a green light from mite.org, but it sets them up for success down the road. So I'm not saying that you should put that on your website or anything, but I'm saying that you're probably giving them a wonderful roadmap on how to get funding in the future just by you engaging with them in the whole vetting process.
I would imagine that's true.
Yeah, I would imagine we haven't thought about that. Thank you for enlightening us on that. I will say this, one other item, and that's key as far as the vetting and the partnering, is the fact that at Mite, we don't come in asking people to do something outside of their scope and outside of their mission. When we're looking at something, we go in and say, how can we help you with what you're currently doing? So don't invent something up. Don't westernize the project. You guys are the boots on the ground. You know what has to be done. Is there a way that our donors can engage in that? And the value, Patrick, is number one, we are building sustainability within their organization. We're not asking them to reach out and create something that's going to be overhead in the future. Mm-hmm. They're just building what their mission is. And the second, the benefit to the donor is this. We know that if we're building within their mission, we are optimizing the work that's being done. It's right in line with what that organization and that group has had a mission to do for years, in most instances, for years doing this. So the donor knows they're supporting something that has a high likelihood of successful impact and sustainability. That's a big deal for the donor side, from the donor side. So,
well, how do you communicate that? So let's just say you've got a project, you've got it out, this is a good to go. How do you communicate, or what communication ways do you reach out to or facilitate for potential donors for that particular project? Are you on the calls with them? Are you pounding the phones? Are you just sending out an email? Is it just sort of like, hey, find us on the internet? How does that work? Because again, I'm guessing you do something radically different than anything else. Just throwing it out there. Just a lucky guess that you're doing things differently. But how do you do that? Because that's such an amazing amount of work put in. I would imagine that you don't just sort of willy-nilly, here you go, kind of pick and choose sort of bit. So I'd love you to explain that process, because I'm very curious about it.
Go for it.
Well, I mean, obviously we have a website. So obviously we update our website that has all of the projects listed on it, and then has a specific area just for updates and insights into what the project is. Like I said, every single month our projects get updated with a report and photos to show what's going on. So there is a nicely developed email that's sent out to the individuals who have given to the projects that basically say, hey, you have an update on your gift and what it's been doing over the last month. Come and check it out. And then they can go out and check out the projects that they've given to.
But when we release a new project, Patrick, you're gonna love this. We have a project drop party. Every quarter, Of course we do. Hey, listen, if they're gonna drop new shoes and drop watches as product and celebrate that, why are we not celebrating charity? An opportunity to give. And so we'll build out a quarter's worth of projects, right? So we schedule them all out. This past quarter, we released 5 projects. We had a project drop party, online Zoom meeting similar to this, got the donors coming in, new and existing donors coming in, and we launch those projects and we celebrate the launch of those projects. We go through all the details that, you know, what's involved, who we're working with, where it's going, how much it's going to cost, get involved. And that's the launch of the project. And that's the initial ask. And then from that point on, with engagement, we just continue to update as the project goes through.
I hope again that the nonprofits that are listening to this are relating their own systems, again, not as grand and not as creative and whatever, but you have to update your donors on things. You cannot assume that they know what's going on. You cannot assume that they are communicative with the way that you do it. You cannot assuming leads to a lot of donor attrition. This is why you're listening again to this playbook on how you can use the system that you have built. Again, not as unique and not as niche and not as kind of like this invitation to a drop party. But if you have a new thing at your organization, if you have a new program that you're rolling out in a local school, why wouldn't you do something as creative as a drop party to announce all of these fun things? Yes. Why wouldn't you have this sort of celebration of an opportunity to help solve a particular issue? And I think that's what gets me jazzed about what you're doing. Is it's not a depressive, oh, here we go again, sort of like, oh, the more tragedy in the world kind of thing, right? It's your twist on this is, we're going to go celebrate the idea that we can solve this particular thing. And with your help, you're going to do it. And back to your original statement, Scott, on like, how do you eventually get people where you don't have to ask? You do exactly this in scale it up, because this then leads people to go and get excited about what else can I help solve without you making an ask whatsoever. And people flock to you and they just say, how and what amount can I help with without you having to go ask them, because that's the type of a total mind shift that organizations can't get around. So if you are paying attention, get your butts over to mite.org and figure out what they're doing right so you can associate it back to your projects in the first place.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's
Agreed.
awesome.
Agreed. That's awesome.
Yeah,
And
I love it.
I think sometimes whenever leaders of nonprofits think about updating their donors, and I'm sure we are, or occasionally guilty of this, you think about all these things that you want to update your donors on, and it can sometimes be overwhelming. Even with the project drop parties, we have had to sit down as a team and say, what are the most important things that we need to show during this 45-minute Zoom call to not lose our donors' attention and to not overwhelm them? Even with the impact report that we just sent out, I mean, there were so many numbers and graphs, but it's really, I mean, the second page of the impact report was literally just two recipients of people who our givers had impacted, and it was just their story. And that is what people talked most about whenever they gave feedback. So I think a lot of the times it's just sending over, it can literally be an email with just a recipient who was changed and, 2 paragraphs of their story, and not making it this overwhelming task for the organization to handle.
And remember, I think the piece that we're missing is not all the numbers and the statistics. And as you said, the oh my goodness, here's a tragedy that we, all of this stuff. Our donors are looking for, hey, the solution that was provided, and the celebration. You mentioned celebration. Celebration is one of our core values, and every single project we have ends with a 3.5 to 4 minute, what we call a celebration video. And we invest in getting media to bring back to our donors so that they can literally see the people and the area, the community that was impacted by the gifts. And it's a celebration. It's not it's not a drag to watch. It's like, dude, this is awesome. This is fun. Yeah. And I think that in a lot of instances, I think we're missing that from in translation to the donor, from the charity to the donor, we're missing what they really want to hear. So
yeah, that's I think the main takeaway that I got from that too. I mean, you can word vomit everything at once and nobody's going to pay attention to it, or you can draw out, hey, this is what you're doing. Right. And again, we're so inundated with information. We're so inundated with need. We're so inundated with tragedy or whatever. It is very nice. And especially at entry level gifts, or not high level, but entry level, low level gifts. They want to know what that's going to do. Well, this is what it's going to do. You just attach a thing, and then that thing becomes a bigger thing or more things, but you got to get them in on something so they can get it, completed. You got to go through Mario Land 1-1 before you get to 8-1, and you got to go through the whole process, right? So just don't think about it as I need to finish the whole thing. Go step by step, and that's what you do really wonderfully. I'm sure there are lots of people who want to go and figure out what on earth you're doing better than everybody else, but they probably don't know where to go, even though we've dropped hints like 700 times and it's in the show notes. But where do we go to go find out a little bit more about what you do, what projects you've got going on, how the process works, how your vetting process and your documenting process and your celebration process goes? Where do we go to find out all this information?
You can go to www.mite, that's MITE.org. And we're also on social media. We're on Instagram. We'll post on there quite often. We're on Facebook. We're on LinkedIn.
Yeah. We use all of the different platforms as well.
And our team loves to talk to people. We love it when people vet us and ask us questions. And so you can reach out to our team. Then you can find all of that information on our website.
I love it. We will put that, as always, in our show notes. So after you're done with this podcast, get over there and click on get to mite.org and go scour their page. Their website's very intuitive. There's a lot of fun little logos and sort of financials on there to kind of go and hang out. While you're there on the internet, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast, you should. Let's first of all go click on that and then immediately go back to the show notes. Absolutely. Go check out mite.org. Scott, Madison, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks so much for your perspective. Thanks so much for the creativity you have put back into philanthropy and how you're setting the table for a lot of success. I'm very positive that if people come back and they listen to this podcast again, they can take little nuggets of information on what you're doing so incredibly well and not only apply it to their organization and their programs and their services and how they celebrate some of these wins, which is a big thing that we do on this podcast as we celebrate right?
Yes.
Celebrate those things.
Celebrate.
Thursdays. And I think that's really pretty fantastic. But most of all, thank you so much for being a guest here on the official Do Good Better podcast.
Thank you for having us.
Patrick, thank you so much.
Yes.
It was an honor for us to be here. We appreciate what you do, sir.
Yes.
Super
Thank
fun.
you.